got. And the third image is someone that actually.
All right. I'm a little nervous, and I am also a Touretteer. And when Touretters get nervous, they get Tourettier, but I have a hack. Fat calms the Tourette brain, and I just ate a bowl of butter. So we're going to be okay. I'm not even kidding. All right, so I would like to start with a story. It's going to feel like a goofy icebreaker, but it actually becomes relevant on slide 8. I graduated from the journalism school at the University of Florida with a degree in communications, and I got into this school by flunking out of Michigan State. It was really that simple. When I went to college, I was not ready to be on my own. Some 18-year-olds are, and some are not. And I decided to stop going to classes and started working at a Bob's Big Boy, which is the home of the Slim Jim, for those of you from the American Midwest. And my father was a minister, and somehow Jesus Christ told him that I had dropped out of school. So he showed up at my Big Boy and said, "Pack your shit, you're moving to Florida." So the president of the University of Florida actually went to my father's church, and my father said, "Ray, I have this deadbeat daughter, and I'd like you to let her into the journalism school," to which he responded, "It's one of the top 5 programs in the country. We don't take deadbeats." And my dad said, "I'm sure you want to get into heaven, right?" And I was enrolled the next day. I was obsessed with the University of Florida. I got my degree in communications. I got straight A's, graduated, went right to New York, and began my 25-year career in tech communications. And after I graduated, I became obsessed with going back to speak at the journalism school. And I had heard that they asked hotshot graduates to return and lecture, and my best friend Tiffany knew this was my dream, as did her father, who is a weird practical joker, and he will make an appearance later in the story. So one day I was at my dopey little PR job, and I got the call, and it was Dad's friend Ray, and he had heard about my great success 2 years into my job. And he said he not only wanted me to speak to the journalism school, but the entire student body at the football stadium. Now, this made perfect sense to me. I thanked him profusely, slammed down the phone, stood up and yelled to my boss and colleagues, "Later, bitches, who needs this job? I'm going to be a star," and ran out of the office. Because this was 1996 and just a hair before everyone had cell phones, it took the rest of the day for my friend Tiffany's father to hunt me down and confess to impersonating the head of the journalism school. So I marched back to work the next morning, sat down sheepishly at my desk, and the world kept turning. I'm here today to share my journey and talk about what we in tech can do to foster an environment where every human feels supported. When we talk about underrepresentation in tech, there are certain categories that often come to mind immediately. Perhaps it's women, people of color, or people who identify as LGBTQ+. But how often does a person with a neurological, mental, or emotional challenge come to mind, like depression or Tourette syndrome or anxiety? If you struggle with issues like these, people will judge you on how you act, not on how you look. They're going to find you likable or troublesome or delightful or weird, and these observations can affect your performance reviews and determine whether people want you on their teams. More recognizable underrepresented groups have advocacy programs and communities and laws, but if you're unwilling to shed light on your disability and it's not easily identifiable, you're on your own. I'm going to talk a bit about how you can advocate for yourself if you're challenged in this way, and how the rest of us can help. But let me start by saying I'm in no way minimizing the needs of another underrepresented category. This is not meant to take resources away from their efforts or to suggest that their plight is any easier than mine. It's simply meant to raise awareness for more invisible categories of disability, because I believe more understanding and inclusion in general will help all humans. Let's talk about my Tourette brain. Shit's going down right up here on the right side. It is a neurological disorder involving abnormal activity of the neurotransmitter dopamine, and it has nothing to do with intelligence, lifespan, or any kind of physical disability. Unfortunately, the most extreme and extremely rare permutation of the disorder, which is yelling out obscenities, has been sensationalized and mocked by the media. You've all probably seen either Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, a Saturday Night Live episode making fun of it, 500 Days of Summer, What About Bob? I have the less dramatic kind where I simply seem like a fast-talking New Yorker with some tics. This is good because me yelling out obscenities from the choir would have made my father's job very difficult. There are occasional moments of mayhem at work when I might accidentally throw a pen across the room or Tourette a cup of coffee onto someone's laptop. I believe someone in the audience has experienced that already. But I've worked hard to cultivate a demeanor of affable clumsiness, so it usually works out okay. Because of these dopamine-induced maneuvers with my head, neck, and limbs, I do a lot of things to create ease for myself at work and for my colleagues. Now think about that second part for a minute. Why should it be incumbent upon me, the person with the neurological disorder, to make sure everybody else is comfortable with what just happened? And what if, unlike me, who's extroverted and secure enough to barrel into some kind of comedy routine to get everyone through the moment, you're introverted, or you don't want to expose your challenge to your boss or your colleagues or HR? What if you feel like your job or your career path might be hindered by drawing attention to your issue? What can you do? And perhaps more importantly, what should your company do? According to the US Federal Department of Justice, people with disabilities must not only have a diagnosis of a disability, but also prove that the condition substantially limits one or more major life activities. Some judges have quibbled over what constitutes a major life activity, using a narrow definition that considers only very basic functions like eating, toileting, or walking. However, the US Department of Justice has noted that interacting with others and working are also major life activities, and these are certainly areas where many people encounter disability-related barriers. Individual judges can and do exercise discretion in how they interpret the law, so the outcome of an ADA case that concerns people with neurological or psychiatric conditions is never absolutely certain. This means if you can eat, get yourself to the bathroom, and walk into your office, a company could marshal its resources and deny you accommodation. The United Nations General Assembly adopted the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is the first human rights treaty of the 21st century, and it's a legally binding international instrument that protects the rights of the world's largest minority, which is the 1 billion people with disabilities. It prohibits disability discrimination and mandates the provision of reasonable accommodation that doesn't impose an undue hardship. What is undue hardship? This seems to be the kicker, so much so that it deserves its own slide. Undue hardship is defined as significant difficulty or expense incurred by a covered entity with respect to the provision of an accommodation. In order to determine whether a proposed accommodation imposes an undue hardship on an employer, here's a partial list of the factors they will consider: the nature and net cost of the accommodation, the overall financial resources of the facility, the overall financial resources of the covered entity, and the overall size of the business of the covered entity, the type of operation of the covered entity, including the composition. I'm not going to go on. The point is, I don't want to be on the other side of that legal argument because there's a lot of wiggle room. I happen to work for a great company with lawyers who are gifted and compassionate, and I'm senior and vocal and feel supported by my employer. But what would my prognosis be elsewhere if all of these elements had not come together? Nobody, whether they're from an underrepresented group or not, should feel pressured to share anything about their personal situation they aren't comfortable with at work. However, if you're struggling with a condition that people are not aware of, you cannot expect them to know how to give you what you need. But you can expect them to treat you with compassion, respect, and sensitivity. Let's think about this quote for a second. People on the autism spectrum will happily work unpaid overtime as long as they're enjoying themselves because they don't have a social life and they don't know any better. This came from a person with autism who works in the mainstream tech industry. If this is how people with neurological, mental, or emotional issues are made to feel working in the tech industry in 2019, then those of us who are willing to show that you can be successful and respected and operate at a high level at a company need to share their light. But where do you start if you're not senior, you're not extroverted, and you're not willing to call out your challenges to your workplace? Market yourself. Evangelize your work to your bosses and your colleagues and flag the positive results you're bringing to your company. When your value is visible, you become easier to fight for no matter what your level. Align yourself with someone powerful inside your company who ticks the box in at least one of these categories. Belongs to an underrepresented group, yours or another one, employs a diverse staff, has been vocal and committed to diversity and inclusion efforts at the company. Now, this seems fairly broad and simplistic. Am I really going to approach a senior person of color and be like, hey, friend who's also different, want to buddy up? Of course not. You're not the same. However, anyone who has had to fight for their spot or fight to up the numbers of more people like them at an organization is going to have stories to tell and tips to share. Consider a productivity or quality argument. If you don't wish to disclose your disability or don't want to have a legal discussion, productivity and quality improvement are good reasons for the employer to meet your needs. I struggle with chronic pain and I have trouble getting moving in the morning, but I'm super productive in the evenings. Is it cool if I start my day later and end later? As long as I coordinate with the team, you'll be getting my best work. I struggle with time pressure. I'd like to extend my deadlines a bit so another team member can proofread my stuff before you see it. That way you'll get things with less typos and won't have to waste any of your valuable time. A boss, HR professional, or colleague will respond better and be relieved if you accompany your request for accommodation with specific justification and offer a practical solution. But also note the risks associated with this path. It could become a flag if you aren't disclosing why you need the extra measures. It stinks that the burden should be on the person with the disability to advocate for themselves to get what they need. But when I talk to people who have been able to share their challenges, even only with their boss or one trusted colleague, most have found their lives at work improve because they're able to get what they need to be productive and at ease. Here's what companies can do to meet us halfway. Reach way outside of HR. It is not enough to have a crack team of empathetic HR people if the rest of the company is clueless. Educate and empower all people managers to know how to empathize with team members who have neurological, emotional, or mental challenges. Apply equal effort to every category you support. If Mental Health Awareness Month has a cocktail reception, a Twitter campaign, a movie screening, and high-profile speakers, don't just have a make-your-own taco party for Tourette Syndrome Month. You will always have a few people with super rare challenges who feel overlooked, but it is your job to do your best to uncover all of the wonderfully diverse populations in your company. Being truly inclusive starts with the very first conversation your recruiters are having. Make sure they're empathetic, great listeners who ask the right questions and give good examples. If a potential candidate hears in the very first discussion about how your company accommodates different people and unique work styles, they may be able to picture seeing themselves there. And it's crucially important to empower people with challenges who are willing to share their stories in a way that does not make them feel like a zoo animal. As a comms person, I have shamefully uttered this sentence more than once in my career. You have a female CEO with autism, there's our Forbes cover. That is terrible. That is not okay. How does this woman feel about that? Is she an aberration, or does the company really have a commitment to diversity that deserves to be celebrated? Does she have an actual story to tell? Does she want to tell it? You can't just tackle senior people with disabilities in the hallway and make them go on Oprah to help your street cred. You need to take the time to get to know them, see if they have an appetite to help, and not make them feel that what makes them unique is their only value to the company. These are two of my heroes whose public discourse about their vulnerabilities has been instrumental in helping others. The gentleman on the left is Philip Bergiers, and he was a Fortune 500 CEO who went on to be part owner of the Houston Texans. He suffered from depression and said this about his struggle while CEO of a public company. I never exactly hid it, but instead of talking about depression, I used different terms like brain chemistry. I felt that I couldn't talk about depression in a professional setting because it seemed like admitting a weakness or a failure. The stigma associated with the illness is so strong, I estimate that 50% of CEOs at some point in their lives have struggled with depression. I'm committed to destigmatizing it in the corporate community because it's an illness like diabetes or heart disease. I want to make it acceptable to seek help, and the only way to do that is by talking about it. Going back to what I said on slide 6, nobody, whether they're from an underrepresented group or not, should feel pressure to share anything about their personal situation they don't want to. However, if you're willing and you have a platform, I implore you to use it. When a dialogue about vulnerability begins at the leadership level, it shows all employees they can share their own challenges and ask for what they need without fear of retribution. The woman on the right is Emma McElroy, CEO of fashion e-tailer Wildfang. McElroy identifies as queer, someone who struggles with mental issues, and an immigrant. She says this of deciding why to talk about her vulnerabilities. About 2 years ago, I made a mental note for myself that I was going to be very real with every platform I have. This might mean talking about the fact that I'm queer, or an immigrant, or struggle with mental health issues. I would encourage my colleagues in a leadership role with a platform to let their personal struggles come through. Social media has been a downfall in many ways. It creates this Instagram life where everything's perfect and we eat beautiful kale salads all day. We bury the challenges and the failures. What we know for sure is that people in leadership positions who talk openly about their vulnerabilities make it better for the rest of us, and you don't have to be a CEO to make a difference. I lead with my UF story because I've received feedback that younger colleagues felt they could approach me and ask for help after learning what a dork I am. I become not just a VP at a public company, but someone with a neurological disorder, and a super weird one at that, who has achieved a level of success and ease in my career, who has advice to share. A recruiter friend of mine, Lauren Boyce, likes to say when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we are all in the same shit puddle of confusion, and we cannot solve for everyone's weird feelings, so let's be kind to each other as we try and figure it out. I want to be absolutely clear again that I'm not after anybody else's slice of the pie. I don't want to diminish the desperate need for tech to be better at accommodating people of color, women, LGBTQ+, parents, immigrants, and the list goes on. But I truly believe that more devotion to what inclusion really means will benefit every underrepresented category of human, at least a little bit. So let's all work together to make tech as wildly diverse as possible across every category we can think of so we can create ease for everyone. Thanks.
It's like when you wake up in the morning,